Well, good morning all. I'd like to invite you all into our crisis management conversation for today. I'm James, obviously EHS manager for the project. So the first thing I want to do is start by having a conversation about the topic of what is a crisis. Any thoughts on the floor? Yeah, good thoughts. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, absolutely. So in a summation at that stage, a crisis is defined as being an incident that has escalated to the point that it could actually cause genuine business impact or damage. So if we break down the two of them between what is a crisis and what is an incident at that stage, so an incident, run of the mill, say for example, a person's fallen over and broken a leg. We would define that as being an incident at that stage in terms of a project context according to the incident management plan. If, however, we were talking about having, say for example, an Alimak collapse, 6 people trapped in it, those sorts of things, we'd be graduating fairly quickly from an incident through to a crisis at that stage. The key difference that's being identified between the two of them at that point is effectively down to what the business impact that is going to be at that stage. So in a crisis, we are talking about regulatory impact at that stage potentially. We're talking about safe work potentially shutting down the site at that stage. If we end up in, say for example, a fatality type situation, we could end up in a coroner's report, we could end up in a police investigation or any of the above occurring at that point as well. So it's that next level of escalation that we're going to consider. If we think about our IMT in a normal basis, our incident management team, normally represented by those 4 key pillars. Anyone want to discuss what those 4 key pillars are? Yep, correct. So we've got operations at that stage. So general run-of-the-mill operations about what is our rail network currently doing at that stage. Yep, we've got safety. So safety's primary role at this point will be about that investigative lead. They'll be conducting the investigation, they'll be working with investigative authorities at that point, they'll be liaison with safe work at that stage with the police or any other such groups that happen to be attending site at that point. Yep, we've got assets. So in our assets team at that point, we're talking about what is the damage to the actual structure that has been involved at that stage. We're starting to look at recovery plans. We're starting to look at physical damage at that point. So back to our Alimak scenario. How are we going to get the Alimak back working and functioning at that point? What is the site shutdown? What's the damage that's been done? What will be the new engineering that is required to fix any of that? All within our assets team. And the last pillar that we need to consider is our communications team. So communications are responsible at that stage for making sure that we have gotten clear messaging out at that stage to our key stakeholders that we've identified. And those stakeholders can be a number of different groups at that point. They could be political stakeholders at that stage, whether we need to be talking to Transport for New South Wales. They could be internal stakeholders at this stage, as in the customer themselves. They could be stakeholders within the business themselves in terms of our escalation pathways up into head office, potentially within Australia based, and then our global head office at that point. And then we'd also be looking at that stage in terms of making sure that our communication paths to maybe the general public or even potentially media outlets have been done appropriately at that stage. So those 4 key groups at that stage being our safety team, our communications team, our assets team, and our ops team. So shortly we'll run an exercise. We're going to look at what those roles and responsibilities are in terms of filling those in. The next escalation point past that stage becomes into a crisis. So in our standard way of our IMT escalation, the immediate event has been identified, at which point our operations team are obviously involved and have identified at that stage that there's an issue that needs to be dealt with, and the ops team would normally be running as IMT. Instant team lead at that point. If through that initial conversation with our IMT we've identified that this is actually at a serious level, we're actually in that fatality, regulator interest level, coronial interest level, media interest level, key stakeholder interest level, that are genuinely concerned about what's happened on site, is the point at which we would then convene our CMT at that stage. So the first person that you'll identify at that stage will be our CMT lead, and they're on our rotating rostered basis of whoever the identified senior manager is at the time that's taking on the role of CMT lead. They have the ability to then bring in other assets across the business in order to make sure that we have enough assets in order to achieve the task at that stage of dealing with it. So we may be looking at people like HR, if people are involved, in terms of setting up communication strategies, in terms of setting up welfare for employees at that point, in terms of making sure that, notifications have been made, follow-ups, especially if we're talking about medical follow-ups and those types of events. We would also be looking potentially at that stage of getting finance involved, the accounts people. So in this case, our GM of commercial or somebody similar may be involved in that point. And the reason we're talking about it at that stage is that we're talking about cost implications to the business potentially at that stage. And to the point of, shutdowns, large level expenses needing to be organised. Say, for example, we needed a crane on site. The assets team said we needed a crane in order to fix the problem. That's a $100,000 expense potentially immediately just to get the crane mobilised and to get repairs underway at that point. That's meaning we're needing a sign off in accounts. And last but not least, we'd be obviously looking at our MD delegate or MD/CEO delegate. The escalation point that needs to be considered at that point also definitely includes them. We are now talking about, representation of the business and potential business loss at that stage. Therefore, we need to make sure that the MD or the CEO delegate has been briefed appropriately in terms of dealing with key stakeholders and then also that escalation path, specifically all the way up into head office, overseas, offshore, those types of areas. So there are our base levels of who our team's going to be. Our IMT team are going to stand up, as they would for any incident, but instead of the ops team taking responsibility, we're now going to hand that responsibility over to the CMT. And the reason for that being is that ops have a functional job that needs to occur at this stage. Site operations and our rail network that we're running at the moment needs to stop. Therefore, operational recovery plans need to be created, and that becomes their key focus job, rather than running the overall incident. The assets team, it's all about what is the damage, what is the recovery, what are the repairs starting to look like. Our communications team, how are we going to deal with our key stakeholders on an escalation basis. And obviously we need to make sure at that stage that all comms that are going out at that point are coming out through the MD and the CEO, who as a part of the communications procedure are obviously the appointed key media contact. So any public statement that's going to be made at that stage will be made by the MD or the CEO as a figurehead, and we also need to make sure that we remind all staff at that stage back again, they already know, but we need to make sure we remind all staff about the no contact, no media statements, no making statements that are inappropriate at that stage. Just needs to be reminded as we move through that process. And then last but not least, obviously in the safety team, where I'd fit in here normally, and that's that regulator input. Key liaison at that stage to ONSA, the Office of the National Rail Safety Regulator, key person to the police at that stage that they're conducting an investigation, key point to the emergency services that happen to be on site at that stage, key contact to Safe Work, making sure that the area has been isolated appropriately, that scene preservation has occurred at that stage in order to make sure that the investigation can be carried on appropriately at that stage and Safe Work have access to the right areas in order to do the right things. So what it is that we're going to do is we're going to work through a worked example at this stage, and what we're going to do is we're going to do this in real time. That's literal real time. In the space of the first 5-7 minutes, we're hearing rumours of things going on at that stage, and we're playing this in real time, rumours of stuff happening. And the key side of that rumours is we're not sure how big this is. We don't know how much this is. We don't know how many people are hurt at this stage. We know we need to be doing things. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss what it is that we need to be doing. In 5, 8, 10 minutes time, we're going to get people on site. We're going to get better information starting to come to site from our key contact people who will be starting to provide us with data. Our job here as a part of the CMT exercise is to react to what the data is telling us at the time and to start making future plans. Those future plans won't be set in stone.